And so I understand the first headquarters for the church was in Washington, D.C., correct?
Yep, it was. And
And then there's,
the original church is actually preserved as a historic site. You can actually go in
mhm.
there and see his original office and research rooms and all that kind of stuff. It's not actually operational as a church anymore. It's basically a museum, but it's open to anybody. You
Mhm.
just walk in and just say, "Hey,
Have you
give me a tour."
have you been to its headquarters in California?
I have.
How was it? Like, what did you think about it? Like, I
People are
understand there's
really,
like,
yeah, people
yeah,
are
yeah.
extremely busy. People are extremely busy. There's a lot going on. Like I said, there's anti-drug programs, there's human rights programs, there's the management of the church, there's new church openings that are happening all the time. There's a lot of people who are extremely freaking busy. There's
Mhm.
so that the actual what goes on inside of a church and where things are and how it's set up and so forth is also, I mean, there's a lot of policy that Mr. Hubbard wrote about what goes in a church and how it's supposed to be laid out. So these people, when somebody says, okay, good, in Detroit, Michigan, we found a new building, it's super beautiful, we really like it, then there's a whole host of people who have to go and design it and see if it can actually accommodate all the different services and things that go on inside of a church. So yeah, there's people there that are really freaking busy.
And I would like to confirm everything that has been written or spoken by um, Ron Hubbard is considered scripture in Scientology, correct?
No,
It's not?
no, no, it
Can
is
you
not.
explain it?
Yes,
All right.
absolutely, and that's a common misconception actually. So the and Mr. Hubbard actually he wrote a policy specifically delineating the relative seniority and of of policy and how it works because things when things would first happen, he was the executive director internationally of the church. He would sometimes he'd go and he'd tour a church, and he'd walk in and say, you know, what are all those typewriters doing on the desks? And
Mhm.
it was maybe it was a casual question. Next thing he knows, he comes back, 2 months later, and all the typewriters are on the floor, and he'd be like, "Why are the freaking typewriters on the floor?" I was like, "Well, you said you didn't want them on the desk," like, and then that turned into policy somehow. I was like, "No, no, it was a question. I was asking a question. I asked it, and my secretary wrote it down. That doesn't mean it's now, binding church policy for all churches or something." So he wrote down a list delineating, like where he wrote it down, and there is official church policy. There are things called Hubbard Communication Office policy letters, which are the official church policy. There are things called Hubbard Communications Office bulletins, which are technical bulletins, which say how the religion is meant to be practiced. There are other letters that have varying other levels of seniority of like, okay, good, maybe this was just an order that just said, good, do this right now this year, but it's not something that's binding for all organizations from here on out. It was just a thing that he said at that time. And then obviously he also,
Mhm.
I mean, he wrote a lot of fiction as well. I mean, before actually founding the church, the
Yeah,
whole way that he
like
founded the
science
church.
fiction, correct?
Yeah, well, not no. Well, science fiction was a there's another misconception. Science fiction was a portion of what he wrote, but it's like whatever 10-15% of what he wrote or less was science fiction. The rest, I mean, that what actually the way that he funded his research and funded the opening of the first churches and so forth was his writing. Was that I mean, if I was doing it, I'd be doing systems engineering, but he could do it
Hmm.
as a writer. Most of what he was writing was actually adventure stories, adventures and westerns. So, but because that was what was popular at the time, and then there was some science fiction as well. But sci-fi wasn't as much of a genre at the time. But yes, he did later on write some sci-fi, and there was some that got really popular later on. He in the '80s, even after Scientology, he just decided to just go and do a return to sci-fi, and he wrote Battlefield Earth and Mission Earth at the time, which was sci-fi, and people really know him for that. But that represents just really a fraction of his overall writing output. It's a small bit of his writing output. But yes, he did write sci-fi as well.
Hmm.
But yes,
I think
obviously
that's all
that's
I
not
have.
scripture. that's
Yeah,
Nobody's going to
yeah,
read
definitely.
Battlefield
Yeah.
Earth and go, well, he said that attack the aliens. So no, that's obviously not scripture.
Have you like ever read any of his other books that don't directly like relate to Scientology?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, so the things that don't relate to Scientology, basically, as far as everything that I'm aware of, so he wrote a lot of fiction. It's a ton of fiction. He had personal letters that he wrote. And there was one book that predated Scientology, which was called Excalibur. That was a manuscript that was written, but he later did not release it because there's a lot of it that didn't hold up after the later releases in Dianetics. So that was never released as a book. But in terms of everything else, I've written. I mean, I read Battlefield Earth, or I read Mission Earth. They're entertaining reads. I mean, I'm into sci-fi to a degree. I'm also into fantasy and other types of lit. So it's not my only thing. But I've definitely read that.
I read like how some of his critics like used to like say like Scientology was nothing but fantasy. Do you think he like tried to distance himself from his past work while like Scientology was coming up?
You know, so in you kind of get a sense of that when you kind of chronologically both read the books, but also listen to how he talked when he was giving these lectures, because it gives a lot of color in
Hmm.
those lectures about kind of what's going on and how are things being perceived and so forth. And obviously, it was a different climate back in the 50s. I mean, back then, yes, there were critics,
Hmm.
but the main thing that was going on, we had a Cold War, we had imminent threat of nuclear annihilation. It was a wild time to be alive. Um,
Hmm.
and I actually really don't get that what he was writing or what he was doing was really in response to anything besides. I mean, he was a very purposeful, very driven individual with respect to solving the problem that he had set out to solve, which was let's get a completely workable philosophy that can be used to help folks. And that was the entirety of it. You just see him continuously reworking and refining, and like, okay, I hadn't figured this out before. Now we've got this figured out. We tried it out. We tried out this other thing. Totally didn't work. Tried this. Totally works. Okay, good. So that's where we're going to be going now. It was
Hmm.
extremely pragmatic, and really wasn't in response to anything besides was it working or not.
All right. Those are all my questions.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd like to thank you again for taking time out of your day to help.
Hey, you're welcome. I hope it was helpful. I hope it actually answered
Yes,
everything for you.
extremely helpful. This will be really helpful doing my last source for my research paper.
Well, great. Well, if you have anything
Yeah.
else, then feel free to fire it my way. I don't know if you saw it. I keep up with site. I answer a lot of questions and stuff. This is the first video interview I've done like this. I've had a bunch of other like college students and students who didn't say what kind of student they were and so forth asking me questions, and so I
Mhm.
have written those out, answers to that out in blog post form and so forth. But hopefully
Would you
this is
like to
digestible.
like link your website, like say your website name?
Oh, sure. It's Scientologyparent.com.
Super. All right. All right. I think that's it.
All right,
Let's
cool.
go end already. All right.
All right,
Thank you.
good.
Have a good
Well,
night.
have a good evening, and yeah. Again, if you ever want to just step in, if you like zero obligation, if you just want to just drive by and say, "Yo, I had a whatever hour and a half or whatever we've spent with your son." My dad works at
Hmm.
the church in DC, and he's a cool guy, so he would definitely take time out of his day to say hi.
I mean, I find this really interesting, like the whole like Scientology, and I do plan on looking into more. And I feel like this project has been really helpful and pretty fun exploring more about it.
Well, if I'll say one final thing on that is that so one of the things that I did, so I went to a school which used a lot of the study technologies of Scientology, but in itself wasn't a Scientology school, but it had a
Hmm.
comparative religion class that we did. And one of the requirements of that class was we had to go to a bunch of different religious services. We had to actually not just read about it. I mean, we did a lot of reading. We read like the Bhagavad Gita for Hinduism, and I read the Quran, and I read the Bible, and a bunch of stuff like that. And but we actually had to go in
Hmm.
and go to services, and I felt like that sort of a personal connection is nice because you get to see people for real, and it's a big difference reading about something at a distance and seeing somebody in real life and going, oh, you're a
Yes.
real dude, and you're actually kind of cool. So yeah, I recommend that sort of thing, even if you have like I had no interest in becoming, a Catholic or or becoming Islamic or something like that. But I definitely super appreciated their allowing me to come in and participate in the service.
Yeah, I kind of like agree with you. Like I relate. I think like I'm interested in like other religions, but I don't really see myself becoming like putting myself in there, like getting involved. But I just want to like have a really good understanding of it.
Oh, sure. Because I mean, just like anything, I mean, just similar to when you study history and you study about other countries so that you can travel and then not make an ass of yourself. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Like you can
yes.
actually not like
That's well.
step on somebody's toes because you said something that was ridiculously disrespectful or something like that, and you had no idea. So just to
Mm-hmm.
be more cultured. So all
Yep. All right.
right, cool.
I'll
Well, good. Well, I'll
message
end this
you if I
off,
have
and
any
this is
more
probably going to
questions.
be a big ass MP4, but I'll
Yeah.
try to grind it down and send it to you.
All right, super. I'll email you or message you if I have any more questions.
All right, great. All right, good. Good talking to you, man.
Good night.
Okay, bye.